Welcome everybody to the third and final day of the first virtual Federation conference. Hopefully you've been through a number of these introductions over the last couple weeks. I have a bunch of people today who are going to be speaking about EPR, and they have a lot of important things to say. So I'm going to be relatively brief. Today we will be starting out with an introduction from Luann Meyer talking about the Federation. We will then move into, at approximately 10:30, we'll have Andrew Radin, who will moderate our talk about EPR packaging. Extended producer responsibility is a super hot topic right now, so it's going to be good. Next slide. Okay, some basic housekeeping stuff. Attendees will be muted. You will not be able to talk or be seen. However, if you have questions, submit questions using the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. Just click that. If you have a question for a specific presenter or somebody else who's been involved here, make sure that you include that in your question. Andrew will be dealing out the questions when he sees fit. And based on what I've seen from previous presentations, most of the questions will get answered. This presentation is being recorded as well. And I believe, if possible, if the presenters are okay with it, presentations will be made available on the Federation website in the future. Okay. Next slide. Okay, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Rich Bills, President of the New York State Association for Solid Waste Management. Like I said, I've already been through this, but we have a number of good presenters today. I'm probably just about ready to hand this off to Luann Meyer, if she's ready to go.
I am ready, yes.
All right.
Take it away. I'll
take it away, Luann.
All right. Glad to see you guys, that we have people joining us in, and we have all our panelists here today, which is great. So I am filling in for Russ Rutkowski, the man, the legend, and just talk to you a little bit about, and I know he's listening in, so I better say the right thing. Talking about the Federation Conference, and as Rich said, you know, we have heard a lot over the course of these 3 weeks. The introduction Bruce gave at our first session about the Federation and how it's made up of the 3 associations. And obviously, if those that are not aware, the 3 associations come together and put on a conference every year in May at the beautiful Sagamore Resort in Bolton Landing. And obviously, we unfortunately had to cancel basically twice. We were going to do it obviously in May and then try it again in October, and instead we're doing a virtual, which is really what most everyone is doing these days. We continue to be, so people are asking what's going to happen in May 2021. Well, I'm sure you're all wondering and wish I have an answer for you, but I don't. And so we're working with the Sagamore and have multiple conversations with them, as well as exhibitors, you know, and all of our vendor operators and whatnot, to ensure the most important thing is that everyone is going to be safe. And so more will be coming out, you know, as we learn about it. And we'll be sure to keep all of our loyal attendees and vendors and exhibitors in mind as we make these decisions going forward. The plan, if we do have to go virtual, we will. But we are accepting abstracts. And I'm going to just advance the slide. To be this Friday is actually, no, not this Friday. Next Friday, November 6th, is the deadline for accepting abstracts for the May 2021 conference. So we want to ensure that people are still thinking about topics of varying types. And you see from this short virtual conference that we had a lot of different topics, and we're always looking for more. If you submitted an abstract for May 2020 and you did not obviously didn't get to present because of everything that happened, we urge you to resubmit. And then we will work on putting together a program, you know, and moving forward like we usually would. And then hope for the best. And if worst case will be that we will be seeing everybody over Zoom. And I just listened to a webinar yesterday that SWANA put on about fun things that you can do by doing virtual conferences. And so one of those is actually doing a scavenger hunt in your own home by someone calling out items, and the first person that comes to the screen and shows their item could win a $25 gift card to somewhere, and a sponsor would, you know, provide that. So some fun things like that. We'll try to make it exciting going forward if we have to go that route. With that, I don't have a lot more to say besides just submit your abstracts. Go to nyfederation.org to the conference and submit an abstract. But we are open to hearing any topics, or if you want to run something by myself, or Amy Miller is the technical program coordinator, you can send an email to her at program@nyfederation.org as well. With that, I think I'm done, and we have all our panelists, so I'm going to turn this back to Rich. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot, Luann. Luann has done a lot of the work to put this thing together and has done an awesome job. So thanks a lot, Luann, for that, and to the Federation. It is my pleasure to introduce Andrew Radin right now. Andrew is the, I know him as the EPR guy. He's the guy, I think, who knows it all, knows everything, is on top of all the details, and is going to do an excellent job guiding you through this selection of fine presenters today. So without further ado, Andrew Radin.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Rich. I think it's good to be the EPR guy. I hope it's good to be the EPR guy. I'm still hoping maybe there's a free t-shirt or hat or something involved with that. But thanks, everybody, for tuning in this morning. And thanks to the Federation, too, for including this important topic in this somewhat truncated online Federation conference this year. Really appreciate that opportunity. There's also, I think, I just want folks to know that there's some New York Product Stewardship Council board members who are on with us this morning. Dawn, of course, and Luann are members of the Product Stewardship Council Board in New York, but also Ken Armelino, I think, is on the call, and Risa Domino as well. Special thanks to Risa, who helped us line up some of the great speakers that we have this morning. Rich had mentioned that that EPR is a super hot topic, and I'd like to think we have some super hot speakers for you this morning. And just a quick overview of our flight plan this morning. Garth Hickle is going to provide an overview for us of packaging policy activity in the U.S. right now, with a focus on state and corporate initiatives, and then pose several key questions for EPR packaging in the U.S. And then after Garth, we'll have Dawn Timm, who many of us know and work closely with. Dawn is going to take a look at the evolution of the New York Product Stewardship Council's packaging stewardship proposal from the perspective of local government. And then after Dawn, we'll have Steve Changaris from the New York State chapter of the National Waste and Recycling Association. He's going to highlight how EPR developments are now moving from discussion to action, which is leading to the emergence of some interesting new partnerships. So interested in hearing what Steve has to share with us. And then Andy Hackman, who's representing Ameripen this morning. Andy is going to discuss industry's perspective on EPR and a vision for how industry financing could be structured in the US to provide support and improve recycling. And finally, Dave Pearce from the Canadian Stewardship Services Alliance is going to provide us with an overview of recycling-related policy in Canada, as well as the key components of an effective EPR framework. And we're really fortunate, I think, to have Dave on board this morning, because clearly Canada are the leaders in North America in advancing and improving EPR systems. So it'll be interesting to hear what he says there. We're going to try to do a couple of questions in between each speaker. So as questions occur to you, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll try to get a few in between each speaker. And before I forget, Just also want to mention too that we've actually got two EPR sessions coming up for the NYSAR conference, and I believe the date is November 19th for the EPR sessions for NYSAR, but I think that's the whole NYSAR session is actually November 17th, 18th, and 19th. So please check that out, folks, and please tune in to the EPR session for NYSAR as well. So that's kind of the quick overview of our plan for this morning, and leading us off is Garth Hickle. Garth is an independent consultant with an emphasis on environmental product policy and the circular economy. Previously, he led the product stewardship program for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. He's also a senior lecturer and visiting scholar at the University of Minnesota. He currently serves as a board member of Sustainable Electronics Recycling International and the STEP initiative. Please know that Garth holds a Master of Studies in Environmental Law from Vermont Law School and a PhD in Industrial Ecology and Sustainability from Erasmus University in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. Now, here's Garth to provide an update on packaging policy activity in the U.S. with a focus on state and corporate initiatives. Garth, you're up.
Great, thanks. Is everyone able to see my slides? Okay, perfect. Well, I really want to thank the Federation for the opportunity to be here today. This is an incredibly timely topic, as you mentioned, Andrew, and I'm really pleased with the other panelists, some of whom were directly involved in some of the initiatives that I will be touching on today. So I intend to just provide a very quick overview of some of the legislation and other initiatives that have been unveiled in the U.S. over the past year. It's been a very busy time for EPR policy consideration for packaging. And then lastly, close out with a couple of the key themes and questions that I think that those of us who are involved in this policy discussion should be considering.
Hi, Garth. Excuse me. Actually, would you be able to make your screen full and then go into presenter mode? We're able to see some of the background.
Sure. Let's see. Okay. How's that?
Much better. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. Well, I think it's important to highlight that Maine really had taken a leadership role on consideration of an EPR model for packaging in the U.S. They had a robust discussion earlier this year in the legislature that was cut short, obviously, due to the pandemic circumstances. I think it's important to note that in Maine, it was really a financial model in terms of having the industry support the local recycling programs, but did not really change much of the relationship and key arrangements for the collection and processing of recyclables in Maine. New York, and I'm sure that others will be able to get into this in more detail, I think presents a really interesting model that really borrows from some of the learnings, particularly in the Canadian provinces. And so that'll be really interesting to see how that discussion unfolds in New York. And then lastly, in California, is that after 2 years of pretty robust consideration at the legislature, the bills in both the Senate and the House have not been able to advance. I think it was generally focused on a plastics strategy, obviously prompted by the concerns around marine debris and so forth. I think that one of the looming questions is that there's obviously a upcoming ballot initiative to move forward several of the provisions that were suggested in these two bills. And so the real question is this an issue that actually should be addressed through initiative or referendum versus full legislative consideration? From my vantage point, it's a very complicated issue with many moving parts. I think that the legislature is probably in a better position to be able to handle that, but that's obviously my interpretation. We've had a pretty robust range of state and local government study activities, both NERC and NUMOA, and I'm sure many of the people on the webinar today have participated in this effort, jointly released a white paper on EPR for packaging and printed paper this last April. So again, trying to gather input and look at this from a regional perspective, I think has been really helpful in terms of, what are some of the opportunities for collaboration and consistency across various states. King County and the city of Seattle did issue an EPR policy framework that specifically identified some particular strategies for packaging and paper products that was issued in March. It's a very comprehensive document, and I think addresses some of the particular issues that EPR policy consideration at the local level is investigating. The Oregon DEQ had a recycling steering committee that was really created to look at a new approach for recycling policy in the state, and they adopted a policy concept with EPR components in September of 2020. And just for disclosure's sake, I was on the consulting team with Risa Domino and RRS that supported the Oregon DEQ in that effort. And then lastly, the Washington State Department of Ecology, following a legislative requirement, was moved forward recommendations from a consultant on a kind of broad approach to recycling policy in the state. And that recommendations report was issued in September of 2020, but it looked at EPR for all consumer packaging, the addition of a deposit system just for beverage containers, as well as recommending recycled content requirements for plastic packaging. And it's expected that the Washington legislature will take up a bill or several bills that address all or some of these components in 2021. Ameripen, and I'm really pleased Andy is on the webinar today and will be able to do much more justice to this than I am, but issued a statement of principles for packaging policy consideration that acknowledges the possibility for industry funding. Something very similar was issued by the Consumer Brands Association, formerly GMA, that developed a recycling policy platform that does include a fee on virgin resin and a per item fee. So again, pretty significant steps forward from some key industry organizations. Interestingly, the Global Consumer Goods Forum did issue a report recently on an optimal EPR policy, and some of the very large US-based brand owners and retailers, including several from the beverage industry, as well as Walmart, did sign on to that policy report. I really encourage folks to take a look at that. I think it's a pretty important document and is obviously intended to be used internationally, as many nations are in the process of considering EPR policy. The American Chemistry Council did issue a roadmap to reuse document that suggests industry paid fees. And then lastly, the Recycling Partnership has developed a federal legislative model that incorporates producer fees into the funding mechanism to support local recycling programs. And so all of these, I think, constitute a pretty significant shift, not only from individual brand owners, but trade associations, acknowledging that kind of the current economic model for municipal recycling is just simply not fit for purpose at the moment. And then just lastly, I want to close out with some of the kind of key questions that really come to my mind as each of these initiatives and bills and so forth are put on the table. One is, are we really looking at a circular economy framework, or simply financial support for the existing recycling program? Obviously, the circular economy framework has really gained a lot of traction, particularly in the European Union, and we're starting to see sprouts of that in policy around the globe. And so I think the question is that do we in the US want to use EPR as well as some other tools to really move towards much more of a broader circular economy or materials management strategy? Another key question is the role of program participants, and specifically is what degree of system change is really desired. And this really falls into several different categories. One being governance. Is right now local governments are really in that position of making decisions about the programs. Should the brand owners or potentially others have much more say as we in that structure and decision making going forward? And secondly is the whole role of competition. The International Solid Waste Association and PSI had a recent webinar looking at competition within EPR schemes. It's a pretty significant issue and commonplace in Europe. Most of the EPR programs in the US, with the exception for what's in place for electronics, are really premised on a kind of monopoly or single entity model. But for packaging and printed paper, given the degree of varying opportunities and pathways for collection and so forth, should more competition be contemplated within that EPR framework? The scope of the producer financial responsibilities. Up to this point, several of the bills or recommendations have really been fairly reduced in scope in terms of what the producers are being asked to finance. While obviously that makes sense in terms of again, trying to support the existing recycling system, does that really make sense and really structured for long-term success? And another is the consistency and common goals between states. I think all of us have seen the experience for the 25 different state waste electronics programs, 24 of which are premised on EPR model. All of them have, in some cases, very distinct features, and we really have not been able to craft an approach that really presents a consistent set of signals and expectations to the manufacturers, particularly around design. And then lastly, that certainly falls into kind of what should be the recycling goals and environmental outcomes through an EPR program for packaging. The whole notion of modulated fees is obviously very much front and center in all of these discussions. But if we sat down and determined what really are those common environmental outcomes that we would like to see, is it just simply recycled content, design for recyclability? How does greenhouse gas emissions fall into this? And then lastly, again, kind of traveling back to that idea around the circular economy, is should we be looking at much more specific notions and strategies and provisions and bills to support source reduction and reuse? So with that, I just wanted to close out, and again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and really look forward to the forthcoming discussion.
Thanks, Garth. Thanks for bringing forward some really, some of the high-level issues of concern here and some of the developments that are happening across the country. I'm hoping, folks, that we can, as I said, ask each of our speakers maybe a question or two in between each presentation, and then obviously also hold some time for the end as well. But, Garth, just, I guess, if you want to take out your crystal ball for a sec, and in terms of any of the proposals that you're seeing so far, is there anything that kind of in the country that really strikes you as like, yeah, that could be a really, elegant winning approach? Is there anything that kind of stands out above the rest as like, that really takes advantage of a lot of the lessons learned and can really be a model for other states in the country type of thing?
Well, I think that we'll see a pretty much more expansive range of policy proposals in the next two legislative sessions. I would say, given the limited number to date, I think that there's some real value in terms of what New York has introduced thus far. I think that there's some elements of that in terms of allowing or supporting kind of industry supported and driven collection models, not necessarily just simply relying on local programs. So I think that there's some real value there.
Great, thanks. Well, speaking of New York, our next speaker is Dawn Timm. She's the director of the Division of Environmental Solid Waste in Niagara County. For the past 13 years, she's been dedicated to efforts related to waste reduction, recycling, and collection efficiency in and around Niagara County. Dawn's also very active, as I think many of us know, in the state's statewide solid waste organizations. Notably, she serves as the vice chair of the New York State Product Stewardship Council. Thanks for doing that, Dawn. Where she participates in the advancement of product stewardship policy with the goal of both modernizing recycling and better aligning program costs with those who benefit from recovery of these materials and remarketing of the materials. Dawn's going to take a look at the evolution of the New York Product Stewardship Council's packaging stewardship proposal from the perspective of local government. Dawn, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew. It's not lost on me. I just want to mention to you that's the highlight of my day is the reference to a super hot speaker. So thank you for that. And of course, I share in that joy with the rest of my panelists. So thanks for all of you being on board here, and hopefully we'll have a great dialogue. Changing gears from that introduction. What I want to talk about today is about obviously New York State's efforts towards packaging stewardship policy. And the backdrop for me is to come from the local government perspective. My goal here is to make make a marriage between local government and advancing materials management efforts, increasing recycling, source reduction, and other points that Garth was making. So please, next slide, if you would, Luann. If we take a step back and look at the with a really broad lens and look at recycling from local government's perspective, you don't need to be anyone in this field to say that, anyone can make this statement. Local governments are struggling. The evidence of that, is in our extremely stagnant recycling rates. For the better part of 20 years, we've held it pretty steady around one margin. And that's despite, a blossoming change in packaging in and of itself and what we use in our homes. We can throw into the mix the global commodity market collapse, and we've kicked that dead horse so many times, but it has ultimately resulted in local governments making some really challenging decisions. Do we limit our program? Do we change our program? Do we stall our program? That becomes a very much a reality. I know for us out here in the Western New York area, we're not necessarily considering suspending or discontinuing, although I never thought in my career that discussion would ever take place concerning recycling. But you start to hear grumblings of it, and it's concerning. But that's because we're paying $75 to $100 per ton to process recyclables, when just a short time ago, 7-8 years ago, we were making a revenue source. It wasn't lucrative, but it was a revenue source, and you turn that on its head to paying $100 a ton, which in my neck of the woods and certainly other areas of the state is a bit more than disposal. So what I'm kind of trying to do here is set the stage for some policy heroics. So I'm not a total policy geek, but pretty close. There's an opportunity, but let me talk more about other things that bug us here in municipal government. We use a lot of really common materials in our homes, food packaging and preparation, toys and single-use items, a lot of things that are introduced. And if you have children, which I have 2 young children, that the waste stream just goes from, it exponentially increases, especially with each kid, as I'm realizing. But can these things be recycled? You know, you want to believe so. You want to believe that your strawberry containers and your green bean containers are all recyclable, but it's not so fast. No, it's not. It's a struggle, and that education component, and you know, the being the Don Timms and the Andrew Radins of municipal government in sharing that with our constituency is sometimes lost, and we have no control. Labeling, there could be packaging sent in your meal prep service that very much indicates that you can put that in your recycling cart or your bin, and you can't. And we have this disconnect. What about stimulating a post-consumer market? Can we look at some policy where it's not only an environmental driver, but it's an economic driver? I think anyone in local government love to say that we have a reprocessing facility in our community that's brought X amount of jobs and is using post-consumer products, which is in turn stimulating our recycling market, providing that feedstock. Circular economy, really cool buzzword, and some great terms to be using as we carry forward. So in New York, I talked about, you know, the little bit of the grumblings that I'm hearing, at least from local governments, about suspending or changing their recycling program. We have a source separation law, 120 AA here in New York, that, you know, for all intents and purposes, essentially requires local governments to offer source separation or recycling collection as similar to, or equally as convenient to solid waste. So, you know, your plastics, when you know the broad range of plastics that there are, but, you know, mainly, you know, ones and twos, they need to be equally as convenient to manage as it is to throw, you know, a disposable item out. So next slide, please. That's the backdrop for the recycling reboot. Now moving into organizing. You know, so here I was talking about setting the stage for some heroics, but how? You know, how could we possibly improve upon our recycling infrastructure and give it a shot in the arm, you know, a kick in the behind, and try to modernize our approach to this circular economy? The answer could be potentially through policy, where we can streamline labeling, where, you know, forward-facing products have consistent education. There's minimum content requirements in there. And local governments always love revenue sources. So could we also, you know, lump on in the backpack of this policy proposal some financial release to local governments? So an extremely disciplined and coordinated effort with the New York State Product Stewardship Council was mediated by the Product Stewardship Institute. I've got a lot of tongue twisters going here. That allowed many stakeholders from public, private, not-for-profit, and other related environmental solid waste fields, allowed us to get together and start fleshing out our thoughts. And we actively engaged in some really constructive dialogue over the course of several months. This was taking place late last year and into the new year, meaning 2020. Which to a lot of us is probably feeling really darn old right now. But we looked at evaluating benefits of the Canadian models, British Columbia and Quebec. We started to create some buzz as a group, and more folks have started to engage in our constructive dialogue. We've identified some legislative partners that have started to take place in our discussion. We've identified more partners, which is always great. And, you know, with anything in policy creation, it's, you know, it's the more the merrier. The more we can pile onto the wagon and have some constructive, engaging dialogue is always helpful, specifically in an infancy of policy creation. Next slide, please, Luann. So, you know, we have this opportunity of reinvention. And for those that know me, you know, I have gatherings with my friends called Math and Martinis, and everything is always focused on a bar stool or some sort of adult beverage of one kind. So I always like to look at the reinvention of recycling from a product stewardship perspective as a bar stool. That if we can engage manufacturers in the management of a product's end of life expense, then the monkey is off government's back, if you will. Everything now stops with government. What is government going to do? And I'm speaking from my Western New York perspective here. But what is government going to do with my computer? Oh, and in the state of New York, we have an e-waste law, and you know, to some extent, we are awesome with our recycling efforts and have really diverted massive amounts of electronic waste from landfills. But it's still government. It's on government's back at this point. What is government going to do with my packaging? What is government going to do with my mattress or my carpet? If we start to engage manufacturers, then they in turn bridge the gap between government and constituency by engaging consumers. As I said, these heroics when it comes to a policy creation is we have the opportunity to expand and simplify education. Can we come up with multilingual, consistent labeling and educational opportunities where we have the opportunity for a consumer to stand there and make a choice between what sauce container is best for the environment? We may have that opportunity. We can stimulate post-consumer use. That is minimum recycled content. And that's a double benefit, a double whammy. We get job creation through the circular economy, and we're making the feedstock of recyclables valuable or in demand. And we get to reduce municipal expenses. Huge bonus here. This is the stuff that in dialogue with local leaders in this portion of the state that I've been engaged in, this is a real attention grabber. So if we have the opportunity to reinvent our approach to recycling by maximizing the use of our existing infrastructure and potentially identifying a revenue source through policy, heck, people want to sit down and talk to me. So that makes me feel good. So next slide, please. I want to be really brief because we could really get bogged down in some of the details, a lot of the details. But as I said, we had that really well-coordinated dialogue that the Product Stewardship Institute mediated for us amongst our group focusing on packaging. And we created elements, and there's over 20 of these elements. So they're specific, and I don't want to undermine the effort that went into all of these efforts. They're extremely important, and they really provide a solid spine to the support we have for policy in New York. But really quickly, covered materials. Garth mentioned packaging and paper products, PPP, another acronym, for us solid waste folks. Any package or container that's used for the containment, protection, shipping, handling, presentation, whatever it is of a product you purchase. So this could be me, down the cereal aisle, or this could be me ordering cereal from a shipping conglomerate. There's packaging there, and this is the type of packaging we're looking to cover. This packaging the policy and the elements that we're supporting, that the covered entities would primarily be those servicing single and multi-residential units. Anything that government is touching in a way or providing a service to. So in the state of New York, this is going to be dramatically different. I've got a village of Barker of 245 participating units, and that could be honestly one building in New York City. So there's a very broad brushstroke of covered entities, and we're certainly knowledgeable of that and have addressed that to the best of our ability. Who would be responsible? Who would be responsible for creating or responsible for their packaging or their products? And in this case, it would be the manufacturers and those that offer for sale or import for sale or sell in the state of New York. We have a funding mechanism. So this is the part where local government perks up here. That there would be producer fees established by a producer responsibility organization. So this would be an organization, as we all know, that would represent manufacturers of those products. This would be a state viewed program, plans required, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea here from a funding perspective is that the PRO would work to raise funds. Obviously, you know, that they're not going to do it out of the kindness of their heart, which I'm sure some of my colleagues on this panel will discuss. But there would be some structure built in for fees. Now, when I have math and martinis with my friends, it's, you know, they throw up their hands and they say, oh, that's great, Don. So, you know, a jug of milk is going to go from $3.89 to, you know, to $4.20. No, that's not. You know, we're going to be very realistic about it, in the sense that it's a fraction of a cent. And again, perhaps the folks from Canada can explain about some of those fees. But the goal here is to implement some eco-modulating fees that the greater the recyclability, the greater the environmental friendly nature of the product is, the lower the fee. And we also realize here that the funding mechanism could be a sticking point, because is this a full reimbursement model where Rich Bills in Steuben County says, hey, it's cost me $14 million for my program, write me a check, PRO? Or is it going to be something where we have the control, where the the producer responsibility organizations have a say in some control? We certainly realize that there is some work to be done there, and there's a lot of thought that needs to be given into that component. But again, it's looking at revenue. There has to be some level of revenue share or reimbursement for the recycling infrastructure in these communities of New York. We talked about design for, I didn't, but Garth talked a bit about design for environment, that we're looking to incentivize producers to choose recyclability and reuse rather than not. We've created elements for performance and convenience standards, and the opportunity to advance education and outreach, and avoiding confusion and really truly taking, you know, our early 90s, mid 90s models and updating them to the products we're seeing today. Next and final slide, please, Luann. So guess what? We have a bill here in the state of New York. Garth kind of spilled the beans on me a little bit, but we have Senate Bill 7718 that is by Senator Todd Kaminsky. And what an outstanding policymaker, of course that's bias, but the outstanding policymaker that Mr. Kaminsky is here. He's had a lot of commitment and foresight to develop the buzzword he was using, and we love it here, is circular economy. And he's taken a lot of effort and incorporated a lot of the elements that I just previously discussed at, I said I was going to be brief, but I think I was kind of long, in our elements document. We also have an assembly bill. So not that I'm going to go total sad face, but it's not a same as. And we realize here in New York that we're extremely fortunate to have two bills and to have the state legislature's attention to packaging and the great things that come with it. However, we know there's a bit of work to do to get these on the same page, and we're gearing up for that. So moving forward, you know, the 2021 legislative session is a big giant question mark. I want to believe that, you know, that you know, one day we're all going to wake up and we're going to talk about the pandemic, be like, hey, do you remember the pandemic? That was crazy. And then we can all start talking about packaging stewardship in the state legislative session. But until that happens, you know, we're kind of on our heels waiting for those cues that, you know, the topics that we're going to discuss are going to be anything other than pandemic related. We have recently released a letter with quite a few statewide organizations and private companies in the state of New York encouraging a packaging bill in Governor Cuomo's 2021 executive budget. We have, you know, some reason to believe that we've got a reasonable shot at that happening, which is just, again, another strategy on behalf of the NYPSC to advance this policy. We have an ever expanding coalition of participants, you know, public, private, you know, not-for-profits, getting on board and engaging in that dialogue. And we're continuing to talk, just as I am now, at length about the benefits and to have the discussion. You know, in the elements document there, we realized that, you know, the funding and, you know, some of the details that I left out, you know, are very serious and require a lot of individuals to sign off on it. So we have, you know, our best foot forward. So that is all I had. You know, the story here, the evolution is that in the state of New York, we're looking for, you know, a magic bullet perhaps to reinvigorate recycling, take advantage of all that we have in place currently, and look for our partners in the manufacturing sector, and get the manufacturers involved in their products' end of life and advance a EPR agenda. So with that, Andrew, I am all set.
Dawn, great, thank you. Your presentation mentioned fees, and during the Federation session last week, EPR was brought up, and fees were mentioned in connection with taxes. So could you maybe just explain whether these fees are taxes?
I feel like I'm at Math and Martinis. No, they're not taxes. These are, you know, I think I can answer that in the sense that, you know, we're a bottle bill state and people say, oh, this is just another tax. Well, if you redeem your deposits, then no, you've redeemed your deposit. Right now, you know, a lot of municipal budgets are financing recycling that is derived from tax revenue. This would be outside of the tax revenue structure. The Producer Responsibility Organization, the PRO, would be responsible for collecting their fees and distributing them to local government. As I said, it would be a fraction of a cent. I can't say exactly because we talk eco-modulating fees and the like. So it would not be a tax. It would be more under the lines of a fee.
Okay, thanks. And the only other thing I think I'd like to underscore while we're kind of focusing at the moment on the New York proposal is to suggest to folks on the call here that the New York model is basically the Neapolitan ice cream version of product packaging EPR. And what I mean by that is that municipalities would have a nice little choice of how they could plug into the program. They could, if they so choose, turn the program over to the brand owners, which is, as we'll hear from David, is kind of like the British Columbia model, or they could be reimbursed. Municipalities could be reimbursed by the Product Stewardship Organization for certain costs under the program, or their third option would be they could opt out and elect not to participate at all. So I think part of the strategy and thinking from the Product Stewardship Council in New York was really to provide the local programs with as much flexibility as possible and how they'd want to try engaging in an EPR system. So just wanted to mention that. But, Dawn, thanks, and we'll get back to more questions for you towards the end. And up next, folks, is Steve Changaris. And Steve's a 29-year veteran of NWRA, that's the National Waste and Recycling Association, and its promotion of private sector companies that offer environmentally sound and economically efficient management of solid waste, organics, and recyclables. Steve covers the northeastern states, including New York, and he works with the region's waste companies and interacts on their behalf at the state, local, regional, special authority, and county level. He works with legislative and elected officials, as well as administrative and regulatory officials in all solid waste areas. He holds a master's degree in political science, and his role at NWRA is primarily that of a manager of the many varied specialties within the industry. Those of us who've worked with Steve over the years know that he works constantly to bring consensus on issues with independent waste company owners, corporate executives, engineers, recyclers, facility operators, policy folks, lawyers, and more. Once this process yields a consensus for action on an issue, Steve then goes about working with his members and others to see that the industry's voice is heard on the matter at hand. Steve resides in Massachusetts with his wife, Ann. He has 2 adult children, and 3 grandchildren. And he's here to discuss how new partnerships are emerging as EPR developments move from discussion to action. Steve, let her rip, bud.
Am I good here for volume 2? My volume? Am I good?
Sounded good to me.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining in for this session. It's an exciting time for me in a way, and sort of like you're launching a project, because what I'm able to talk about today is that we have always been aware of EPR. We've always offered commentary on it. We've always participated in it. We recognize what it is. We offered comments about when it might work, when it might not work. And we've been sort of, let's discuss that mode. And, I could honestly say, because we organize and we make decisions on a chapter or state basis, it's a one-off. But my group in New York is authorizing me today to explain that the New York State chapter is willing to support real efforts to bring EPR for packaging and paper materials, or what we consider traditional recyclables, to bear in New York City. So I can certainly say to the group that over the last 6 months to a year, there have been a lot of discussions, there's been a lot of developments, and it's an interesting development for me to be able to sit here today and say, look, we're up for EPR in New York, but as soon as I say that, I sort of have to say that it's with conditions, and there are a lot of deal breakers for us along the way. And there are some other little policy linkages that we think are really important before we get this thing across the goal line. So again, I would say that our views and stuff are pretty firm and gelled, but we're still evolving, and we're going to be on the team. So why have we gotten here? This is my industry that we work with in New York. We have 50, again, this is the good part of my job. I work for people who are employed. These people support families and kids. They pay bills. They're citizens. They're your neighbors, 55,000 of them. Plus, we have a $2.6 billion payroll, a 10.4 combined revenues, and then, with an average salary in the $55,000 range. So this is a significant industry in New York with a lot of people who have partnered and participated and been good actors, and substantial people working to help manage these materials safely and effectively in New York. So, this is the traditional recycling model. I love it. They talk about integrated waste management, but there's no mention in here about how do you pay for the system. It's just the basic outline of the system. And we called it integrated waste in the old days. Now it's going to be sustainable materials management or some new age name as we roll forward. But this is the basic components of it. And what I believe we're here really talking about today is how do we pay for the system. Now here, why has the chapter in New York State with my members gotten to the point that we're ready to say we're okay with an EPR for packaging and paper or traditional recyclables? And it's going to be what we consider a sort of a bind over the next 3 to 5 years. With the COVID pandemic, businesses are reeling, municipalities are reeling, state government is reeling. I'm a hopeful person. Things are going to be okay tomorrow. But from a budgetary perspective, this is the view that we see going forward. It's not going to get better. And when you look at it, like, why has the chapter gotten to this position? Some of these points have been mentioned earlier. We had the collapse of the international markets, the COVID-19 impacts. What we believe most important, that EPR is a known funding source. A lot of these other bells and whistles that people talk about EPR, I've been involved in this discussion a long time, and I'll take some exception with Andrew and my peers, but on the merits of it being a funding source, my industry, the companies that collect and process and manage recyclables and get them to market, believe that we have to get additional money into that system to pay for it, and the EPR is the way to do that. Now, while we recognize that EPR is a stable funding source that can help the system, we're also equally saying that you're going to have to drive this with minimum content legislation. So that's another linkage. If you do EPR without minimum content, you're going to be selling yourself short. So, you know, it's going to take all hands on deck to get this done. You know, that's why I put this slide in there. This is a kumbaya moment for me and my team, and we're anxious to sit at the table and to work with all the parties to get it done. We've talked about the circular economy. This is my view of the circular economy in term, and I say my view, it's been put out to my members and they've let me continue to talk about it. I wish I had better graphics in some respects, but recycling is a whole system, and the law and the government and my guys, we're only part of the system. So EPR is really that opportunity to bring the consumer product companies into the fold, and we're anxious for that. So, you know, the home and business setouts, that's what the citizens and businesses do. I heard something about this is an EPR model for municipalities. We don't think it's should work that way. This is for everybody. It's going to be in or out. You know, 50% of the waste stream and recycling stream comes from businesses. Everybody's in this tent going forward as we see it. The collection and trucking is something that we do. We're expert at it. Our local government companions, counterparts do it. No one does it better. We're excellent at collection and trucking. We run the recycling centers and the MRFs. We either, you know, get that material baled or make it into market ready commodities, and then we either have to send it to a secondary processor because it has to be cleaned up and made into a product that a market can use, or we can get it directly into a market and then or to a manufacturer. And some of this stuff now, glass into aggregate, you know, there are all different kinds of markets, just not plastics, into a bench, into plastic lumber. There are all kinds of manufacturers and markets where the materials we collect go. And then back to retail for purchase and use, and then the cycle repeats. Very important. What we're doing here is bringing the manufacturers into the loop with our view on EPR. Real broadly, you know, the key issues for us are that the product stewardship, or the EPR, the stewardship organization in New York, has to be supportive of all the players in the historical, statutory, and regulatory created recycling system. That includes public and private stakeholders and everybody in the mix. We must maintain strong local government control over that and involvement in the recycling issues, and it should include all stakeholders. We must support supply and demand economics of the international and domestic. You know, Pete, I heard the comment that the collapse of, I think I used the word collapse, but the international markets have not gone away to move our materials. They've gotten particularly picky, and you know, it's more difficult than it was before when China was consuming all the material. But you know, some of my companies are more sort of hell-bent on trying to just find domestic outlets. But I can tell you, a lot of material is still flowing into international markets. There are industries abroad that want our materials. So we have to be supportive of the international and domestic recycling markets, as well as our own domestic recycling industry. That's perhaps, you know, I'm a free trader kind of person, and that's my background. I think a lot of people in my organization feel that way, but nobody raises, you know, an eyebrow when we say we should be more supportive of our domestic recycling industry. We need more of it. And if we go down the EPR road, where we get more material available, we're going to need more manufacturers to consume that material. So get ready to start working with your offices of economic development and your siting and planning criteria with localities to get factories and processors sites developed and built. And then obviously the system that we foresee must be flexible. New York's a big state. And, you know, I'm a regional guy, so I can say the Northeast region is a big region. But boy, when I do work on Long Island, it's not the same as when I'm doing work in Rochester or Albany or downstate New York in the mid-Hudson Valley. It's a different state all over. And it's a pretty wonderful state, I might say. My grandmother and grandfather were citizens for a long time. My mother is born in New York. So, you know, that's our system. These are, you know, I sort of said in my comments that I didn't want to get into the minutia, but, you know, I sort of got cattle prodded that, yeah, let's get into the minutia. So what we like to think of this as a stewardship responsible organization. We want all system stakeholders involved in it. We want a producer funding subcommittee, and that producer subcommittee, and then as well as a management subcommittee, and that's the whole. So the producer subcommittee here, and as other people, in a participatory audience, you can always you can ask people to raise their hand. How much do you know about this? I think this is a pretty informed audience. We envision the producer funding committee to operate pretty much like a traditional PRO, but it's going to be done and if by the way, I could suggest to you folks, is there a traditional PRO? Because models in the producer responsible organization world vary greatly. But we see this working. The producers come together. They have an option. They can opt into their own brand or products, or they could join with the others. They collect the fees. They managing packaging behaviors within the industry. And one of the things that I want to, everyone deserves a shout out. In my work in this space over the last 10 years, the consumer product companies deserve a lot of credit. They've weighted their products. They've stepped up to the work. The American Forest Products Associations, others have done. They're just fantastic organizations doing great work. So, it's hard for me to say that the state of packaging and the state of recycling is damaged and broken. The system's pretty good. It's designed and is working the way we implemented it. So if we want to change it and tweak it and improve it, that's what we're trying to do here. So, the producers will be managing their packaging behaviors within the industries with trends, modulated fees, all that good sort of stuff that is all vernacular to a PRO. But they're going to have to do it, obviously, under this DEC approved SRO plan. The disbursement of funds, this is another big one. These monies cannot flow in. Look, the whole premise, I tried for a while the discussion about why don't we just raise the taxes to pay for the programs. That's a non-starter in the municipal and in the planning unit world. And Andrew, laugh, smile, tell me I'm right. So if that's a non-starter, you got to go find the money from somewhere. And we don't want it to go through the state capitol. So the idea is the producer responsible subcommittee is still going to be responsible for getting these monies either on a formulaic basis, on a per capita or a per ton basis, to the appropriate entities that we discern. And they're going to also set, and under the aegis of the bigger group, the requirements and conditions for funding. And of course, as said earlier, local governments maintain the option to opt in or opt out. These are some more of the key industry needs, about what we see. The management committee is you go from the producers who are responsible for the money and the internal packaging issues. Then it comes to the management subcommittee. We want the DEC to approve the plan and the elements. There's going to be a full group of folks participating that will set the recycling goals and objectives. We'll establish the minimum post-consumer recyclable content rate, the percentages. I mean, it's ironic, as we were so close out of the gate in another jurisdiction to seeing minimum content legislation passed, but then it gets stalled for a variety of reasons. We need more demand side on our recycling equation. And as we divert more material, whatever methods we get there, and if we use the EPR model to get there, that's great. But as we create more demand, as we create more supply, you're going to have to send that material somewhere. Someone's going to have to use it. Otherwise, we're going to be doing a lot of work and not getting the environmental goals that we want to achieve. The management subcommittee will do the funding formula. We'll work out the regional service levels. And again, drop-off sites, subscription service, public MRF, private MRF, planning unit involvement. There's a whole host of issues that have to be worked out almost on a case-by-case regional basis. And this group is ideal to determine to do that. That whole of system approach, the education and support programs. The state of New York listened to us. We banged the gong about recycling contamination. They set up the New York Recycle Right program. We just on a great call with the Centers for Sustainable Materials Management, some of the work they're going to be doing with a state website. We need that education and support, which could flow out of this new structure. And again, the expense limits. This should not be a blank check. At some point, there's a finite amount of money that should be infused into the system, and then we have to have that as a baseline. We have to have a procedure to make adjustments. And then, of course, you have to have some capacity to deal with extraordinary events like maybe the China market collapse for recycling. So that's where we're at. I encourage people to vote. I voted. That'll be my last slide. And I do want to leave with 3 last thoughts, and they're sort of my inevitable discovery thoughts. And that men of a certain age can do certain things, and I'm going to share these thoughts with you. While we're on board and we want to go shoulder to shoulder with our group and make this happen, there's a lot of other headwinds out there, folks. It's going to be a long lift, and we have to be prepared for that. You might want to say 2021 is a great year to really firm this thing up. If we knock it out of the park in 2021, I'll be very surprised. am I betting against myself? No, I'm not. I'm just saying that I'm a legislative guy, regulatory affairs guy. This stuff takes time. There are a lot of moving parts. Another issue that I wanted to bring up was we heard in a other regional presentation where one of the states is talking about if you go to EPR for recycling, that it's going to be a $40 million a year annual savings to that state, the municipalities. And New York's 5 times the size of that. So there's huge cost savings potential to the municipalities, depending on what level of EPR and what level of funding. My only point is, I'm an intergovernmental guy, and it's just a thoughtful process. We do have people in Albany who think if they're going to open the spigot up and pour hundreds of millions of dollars into municipal governments and planning unit governments to support EPR, what are they going to take back? If you think it's a zero-sum game that we just do EPR, that's great. But I can just suggest to you that, you know, my bones tell me that ain't going to fly. You're going to have something, they're going to reduce other funding. They're going to pass over other requests. So it's not a free lunch. And the very, very last point for inevitable discovery, I wish I could have the confidence that it's only going to be 0.5% or some number. This is going to be real money, folks. And whether it's 75 or 150 or $250 a year in an average person's grocery bill and retail purchase bill, I don't know. And it's far beyond my pay grade to determine who should pay that money. But I can suggest to you that there are advocates for the people who are at or near or below the poverty line. And they will look at this, and maybe some other, you know, taxpayer groups and stuff like that, that will just look at this as another expense we have to pay for. And how, in my context, that I really want people to think about, it's going to impact the people at or near poverty line. And you can say, well, Steve, you're supposed to be in support of this. How can you talk about these negative things? The way policy advances is if you discuss all these things and you hash them out and you go forward with a full understanding. My contact information is the next slide. I'd love to talk with you. The industry is going to be a full partner, Andrew, and we're excited to, you know, go forward with this. Thanks a bunch, folks.
Steve, great. I'm smiling, Steve. I'm smiling on the inside. Great information. Thank you. Great to hear that you guys want to engage, see how we can improve the system. I want to just give a heads up to all the speakers that we've gotten kind of a number of inquiries about how a subscription model would work if the government doesn't operate the program. So I think we're going to hold that. It's a really good question. I think we're going to hold it off to the end. But if folks want to speak to how they envision a more of a subscription model working from an EPR standpoint, I think your perspective on that would be helpful. But Steve, you know, I think that you know, EPR to a great extent is about who pays, but it's also, I think, aligning the costs with those who benefit from a system. And right now, you know, the municipalities are you know, bearing the lion's share of the cost there. Whether they're getting all the benefits or not, that I think that could be argued. But what do you think are the going to be this? Like you said, you're a government relations guy. What do you think are going to be the political barriers to moving a proposal, some sort of proposal like this forward, whether it's the Kaminsky proposal or something with some modifications? What's going to be some of the political hurdles coming up?
Well, you know, if I might, Andrew, I'll touch the subscription service. We talked about a per capita or, you know, a per ton fee. This is one of those things that are going to have to be worked out in the details and in the discussions. There is a lot of subscription service in New York. And, you know, if I'm a hauler providing that service, either I should be getting a rebate from where I tip, or I should be able to go to the PRO and say, you know, I've developed, I've handled 20,000 tons of material and get some kind of a rebate. And again, one of the big things, and this is really difficult, because anytime you try to track, you know, I sort of wish in a lot of ways that trash or recyclables were like telecommunications or sewage. You can send it down a pipeline and you can meter it. It's really hard to meter trash and recycling because you know, the idea is the town reports it, the county reports it, the MRF reports it, and all of a sudden you've counted that same ton of recycling 3 times. So no one wants to double pay for a service. We don't want to stick it to our friends on the consumer product companies. Once the fair amount is settled, everybody that is working to make the system work and abiding by the rules and regulations of that system should have an equal shot at getting the revenue to support that. And whether it's a pass-through or whether it's a direct one, those are things that, you know, look, I laid out the broad things that are known about what we consider deal breakers: minimum content and full involvement. God knows what's going to happen when you get down to the table and you get closer to the goal line. The whole thing can look different, and you know, everyone has the right to revisit their position. That's America. But you know, the full, and again, I like to think part of what we said today is credible, should be resonating very credibly with people, because we've been at this table and we've done this before. We're going to work to make this happen, and we're anxious to make it happen. So, you know, the other headwinds, there's just change. People fear inevitable, you know, the inevitable, you know, one of the old sayings in the legislative, you know, world, there's always that concern about unintended consequences. If I support this, am I putting myself out of business? I mean, and I say that not only with the mindset of a private company, but what about a municipality? I mean, we have we have thousands of employees employed in the public sector managing recyclables. Are we going to create, and again, I'm not their advocate. I work with them, I'm aware of them, but the municipalities, the people that you have to deal with, you know, at the legislatures, they have to be aware of what's going on in town hall, you know, with their workforce in their town. And, you know, do we create a system that supports that or tears at it? And, you know, that's one of the things that we're, you know, we're part of that system. And again, I've said enough. So there's a lot of moving parts. I don't know where they're going to come from, Andrew, but they're going to come. I can guarantee it.
Yeah, so real quick, because I want to move into our final 2 speakers, but I think that in terms of some of the concerns or questions that you raised there, I think what we've tried to do with the Kaminsky bill is provide as much flexibility to the locals as possible in terms of what some of their priorities are in terms of a continued participation from a hauling standpoint, from a processing standpoint, et cetera. So I think we've tried to anticipate some of those questions and concerns, and I think they've been incorporated into at least one of the current proposals in the legislature. But let's double back, folks, at the end more about the subscription system so people can understand, I think, what the question is and what the potential approaches are to dealing with it. And I think one of the neat things real quick about today's discussion is we really do have speakers who are bringing various perspectives to the table today. And certainly that can be said of our next speaker, and we're glad to have him with us, Andrew Hackman. He's with Serlin Haley LLP, and he's speaking today on behalf of Ameripen. Andy's a registered federal lobbyist and testified before both the U.S. Senate and lobbied in over 25 state capitals. He previously served as a vice president of government affairs for the Toy Industry Association, where he oversaw its advocacy programs at both the state and federal levels. He also directed the National Government Affairs program at the Consumer Specialty Products Association, which is now known as the Household Consumer Products Association. Andy holds a Bachelor of Science in Public Affairs from Indiana University School of Public and Environmental Affairs and a Master of Business Administration from George Washington University. And he's going to discuss industry's perspective and Ameripen's vision for how industry financing could be structured in the U.S. to provide support to improve recycling. Andy, take it away.
Thanks, Andy. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the Federation today, and certainly appreciate, I think the first time you and I met was at the NYSASWM meeting last year about this time, and appreciated the approach and a frank discussion that we had kind of around where this discussion is going to take us. And want to definitely offer for folks today that industry wants to be at the table. I think a lot of the speakers that are on the panel today are the folks that we need to have a in-depth discussion with as we continue to try to move this forward. I know there's some perception out there that the packaging industry and the consumer goods industry has been opposed to EPR. I think there's definitely been a shift in the last 12 months to maybe even 18 months. but that we certainly understand there's a desire to be part of the system, but also in a way that helps move more material into being a more circular or recycled state. And that really is our goal and our objective as we look at ways that the industry could provide financing and do so in a way that's also fair and equitable and doesn't completely change where our solid waste system is right now, but helps move us forward and move us into the future. So appreciate the opportunity to speak today and allowing this work. Just a little bit about Ameripen, who I'm representing today. Ameripen represents across the supply chain of the packaged goods industry. We are material neutral, so we have everybody from plastic to paper to glass to metal. Within our structure, we have both the producers of the materials, the converters, as well as the consumer brand companies that actually make the item that consumers take home. And we have a few involved in overlap with some of Steve's membership within the waste industry. So we try to cover that whole waterfront for the packaging industry, and are one of the few organizations that are really material neutral and are able to speak to each of the sectors. And as there is, sometimes discussions about paper versus plastic, we're both. And so we hope to offer a comprehensive solution in that space. And I just want to get down to brass tacks. We understand, or at least I think we understand, the pressures that are on recycling and on the solid waste system right now. We do want to continue to underscore that there are benefits around packaging that we want to be able to preserve into the future. And I think a lot of the folks on this call understand that, but at the same point, layered into a number of these debates and legislative forums are efforts to ban certain materials or ban certain items. And so it's important for us to kind of balance that discussion as well, to make sure that we understand that packaging does help reduce food waste. There is a significant reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in terms of moving to materials, as Steve alluded to, that are lightweighted and able to take less material to deliver a product to the shelf that lasts longer. And as we've all become more familiar with, unfortunately, for the last 8 or 9 months or so, sanitary and protection of those goods is something that we really don't want to give up as we move into this new system. So it's something I just want to note as a key driver. Certainly, I think if the consumer goods companies could deliver a product to the consumer without any packaging at all, and it be preserved and safe and sanitary and everything else, they would do that. But certainly the packaging serves a purpose, and we wanted to really help step up and continue to move that material up the hierarchy and close the loop. We are familiar with all the market challenges right now, and so I don't want to spend too much time on that. I know we're running a little bit tight on time, and understand the challenges that a lot of governments are struggling with now, that some of Steve's members are struggling with. And there has been commitment from the brands to move towards 100% recyclable, compostable, or reusable, and there's been significant commitment, I would say, even particularly in the last 10 months, around recycled content. So what has industry done about that, other than create voluntary goals and targets? Ameripen created a financing mechanisms task force in December of last year that really began real serious work at the end of last year and into the beginning of this year to look at how we can participate in the funding mechanism, because we understand that there are pressures here, and we don't want our material ending up in a landfill. That if nobody takes anything else from today, is that industry wants to be a part of a solution that moves material out of the landfill and into a system that's more circular. And that's certainly been the motivator in the discussions that we've had and that we continue to have today. So to jump into some of the things that have been stumbling blocks in terms of us being able to support extended producer responsibility in the past, concerns about inefficient allocation of funding. How are the funds going to be used? I mean, that's obviously a major question that I think we have, a lot of folks within the industry have, is are the funds going to be efficiently distributed into those uses that actually deliver on improving and helping ensure that the recycling system can be maintained? One of the other concerns and issues that we need to address, and I don't want to say just solely these are issues that make us walk away from the table, but they're questions and challenges that we've discussed and hope that we can find solutions to. But within the context of we're just going to pass an EPR bill and it's going to look just like, name your Canadian province or name your national country that has implemented EPR. These are the issues that we've had, and we've had documented from some of our colleagues over in Europe and in some of the Canadian provinces. And we hope that we can address them that it matches the US system and helps move us forward. So new administrative costs. Obviously, anytime we create either a PRO or an organization to begin to administer, collect funds, make assessments, and do that, it's going to take staff, it's going to take time, and we want to make sure that those administrative costs are efficient. Depending upon the level of government involvement, we've certainly seen different iterations of what this could look like. Maine was mentioned in Garth's presentation. Heavy involvement of the state government in the development of that program. A lot of red flags, I'll be just quite frank. We were very involved in that legislation, and we're still challenged by where it was left at the end of the legislative process because of a lot of heavy involvement by the state government in that, and also reimbursement for landfilling, to go back to kind of the first point. Lack of incentives to modernize the recycling system, and you'll see this in sort of future slides, but we do want the system to improve. We do want to see more material, more packages, both from our side of things, trying to design packages to be more recyclable and to use more recycled content, but we do want to see the system evolve into the future. One of the other concerns has been around lack of transparency in terms of costs and use of funds. We've seen that in some areas and in some of the countries that have done EPR in some of the provinces. So we do want to understand where that's going. And then obviously some of the big questions is who's going to control the system. Understand and appreciate that the New York bill was definitely thoughtful in how whether or not a government can opt out, can opt in for reimbursement or hand the system over. But we do think that there's got to be a clear and thoughtful process in having that structure set up. And then again, to one of the points I started to mention earlier, reimbursement for landfilling is really something, I don't want to say there's a lot of red lines in what we're trying to develop here, but it was something that was in the main legislation all the way until they stopped work on it. And it's something that we don't feel moves us into the future because the cost of landfilling is obviously in a lot of cases cheaper than recycling. It doesn't feel like something that our industry can be supportive of if we are trying to help the system and to move more materials forward. So the financing task force really looked at if we're going to create a system, broad strokes, how are we going to do that? We need it to be reliable so that it helps sustain the market and do so through volatility, to be efficient and effective. And that kind of goes to some of the concerns that I talked about earlier, and equitable and fair. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but I do want to spend a little bit of time on this slide just to say, okay, what are our objectives? And what are some of the things that we've started to line out is how we're going to provide funding and some of the guide rails on that. We want to make sure that it's directed towards increasing the recovery and the recycling, and I've mentioned that. We don't envision creating a PRO specific to each state either, and would certainly encourage folks to think about that as an approach that we're going to have to take in order for this to be efficient for the producers. It's got to be administered at a national level. There's some models of that with regard to paint care and some of the other programs that exist. And we really do need this to function at a national level, and then obviously plug into states that move forward with legislation. But that's something that's really important for us so that we don't have to fully charter and have staff in each state necessarily from the PRO's perspective, but that it can be managed efficiently at a national level. We do want the funds to be at least held within the management of industry in the sense that as the money's collected, it doesn't go into the general fund. I want to say that underscored, it's actually 0.8 as well, but that there is industry management and control of the funds. And also efficiency and perhaps caps on administrative costs. One of the things that we did see in the main legislation that we worked on was making sure that there was a cap on the fee or the administrative costs that the state agency was going to seek reimbursement from the PRO. So that's something that we think is important. And that the funding, as we look at its uses. There's obviously a lot of principles around that, and we could probably spend a lot of time talking about that, but we definitely have some ideas around trying to work towards best practices, not duplicating efforts that are already in place. There are a lot of voluntary programs. The Recycling Partnership has got a lot of work in some of the spaces that a PRO might be involved in. So we don't want to duplicate that. And we also, like I said, want to make sure that we're not just filling immediate gaps in operations, but truly moving things into the recycling system and towards that greater closed loop. So this is just kind of a visual of if industry were to prioritize how we're going to use funds that are collected from us. And kind of at the top, the reverse pyramid here, looking truly at infrastructure upgrades across the system, innovation and R&D, consumer education around contamination. I think we've heard a lot of discussion around contamination being a major issue in terms of actually getting the material in a state that we can reuse it and bring it back into our systems. And then improving access. And then at the bottom is funding daily operations. I've heard folks say, are you envisioning a grant type system? And as I understand it, there might be some granting that happens out of the PRO, but there certainly is the ability for us to potentially provide funding to help operations. But we do want to make sure that the majority of the funds are focused up on moving materials forward and not just paying for transportation and paying for elements that are already operational in the system, quite frankly, and fill in budget gaps. To Steve's point, we don't want to be seen as a source of funding that just allows funds to move into education or fire. We do want to make sure that the funding is dedicated and is more than just operational reimbursements. And so where do we stand today in terms of moving forward? We've got publicly principles and objectives. Our board officially approved a policy document this week, so we're getting the finishing touches on that. And then a lot of what we're doing right now is similar to this discussion in terms of outreach and trying to reach common ground with stakeholders and then work towards implementation. So I'll defer to the experts in New York on kind of the time frame for us all getting to agreement. I would caution, I'm nervous about trying to do this in a budget bill in the first couple months of next year, to be very frank, because I'm one that puts kind of a lot of cards on the table. But we want to be part of this build. And I do want to credit New York and the council and the Federation for a thoughtful effort. When I saw the Kaminsky bill introduced, I put a star around it in the sense that it was one of the most thoughtful approaches. In my 10, 12 years of working on this policy and dealing with bills from states from Oregon to Rhode Island to Maine and beyond, I do want to credit the effort that's gone into the Kaminsky bill and want to be part of a discussion that moves us forward and hopefully gets us to agreement. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity, and I know we've got at least one more speaker to try to get in here.
Andy, thank you very, very much. Great information. And there's just a ton of questions that I think all of us would like to start funneling to you. But in the interest of time, I think we will move right now to David and get that going, and then we'll double back to the whole squad here for further discussion. And we are very fortunate, as I said earlier, to have David Pearce on the train today because he is really at the forefront of what's happening in APR in Canada. He's the managing director of the Canadian Stewardship Services Alliance, where his focus is to deliver a common suite of harmonized management and administrative services for EPR programs. A key interest for David is exploring the intersection between public policy and operations to further circular economy outcomes. He's a firm believer that EPR is an important lever to increase and improve the quality of post-consumer inputs to the manufacturing sector. He's played leadership roles in the advocacy and development of producer responsibility programs in Canada. And before joining CSSA, Dave held numerous roles at Stewardship Ontario, where he was responsible for ensuring organizational compliance with all regulatory and performance obligations. He's a graduate from the School of Business at Queen's University. And as I said, he's going to provide an overview of recycling-related policy in Canada, as well as the key components of an effective EPR framework. Dave, to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and good morning to everybody. I'm hoping that what you see on your screen is the full screen view of the slides. Is that correct? Andrew, so you see the full screen of my slides. Fantastic, it's working. Thank you, and thank you to the organizers of the event for inviting me to come and to speak with you today about the Canadian experience with EPR. There is a lot happening across the country at the moment. I hope our experience will benefit you as you look to produce responsibility models in New York and elsewhere in the United States. Just a very quick background on CSSA. We provide services to 4 PPP programs across Canada. We also have 2 hazardous waste programs, one with a focus on automotive materials, one with another suite of hazardous materials. We're active in 4 provinces, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario. And we provide harmonized support for producers that are required to take responsibility for their materials under EPR frameworks. We ease their administrative burden by centralizing the delivery of all of those services. We're able to harmonize policies and various approaches of how the producers interact with the programs and the regulatory obligations, providing one window entrance into those different programs through our system. It provides cost savings to the producers by ensuring that they don't need to replicate all of those back office functions in each of the provinces in which they're operating, because each province has its own approved program. There are some provincial requirements around how those are set up, but by centralizing all the functions we provide, there's significant cost savings to the tune of millions and millions of dollars a year. We're seeing action at the global, federal, and provincial level. Like you, we've all heard the dire prediction from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which estimates that there'll be more plastic than fish in the ocean by 2050. It's a seminal moment, it's an attention-grabbing moment for all those concerned about the health of oceans and the planet. It resulted in the recognition that action needed to take place at the global level. And so the Ocean Plastics Charter was championed by Canada at the 2018 G7 meeting, which was held in Quebec. It's been signed by 26 governments and 70 organizations, including multinational businesses. The Charter commits signatories to work towards 100% reusable, recyclable, or where viable alternatives don't exist, recoverable plastics by 2030, and to recycle and reuse at least 55% of plastic packaging by 2030, and recovering 100% of all plastic by 2040. It looks to strengthen measures around market-based instruments to prevent plastics from entering the oceans and to create some standards or strengthen existing standards for labeling, which will allow consumers to make informed choices. In some cases, it calls for the identification and elimination of unnecessary plastics or the use of plastics in cases where they might not be necessary. And also to develop campaigns around marine litter in G7 countries, working with youth and other relevant partners to raise public awareness and collect data and remove debris from shorelines. And we know that the issue of waterbound plastic isn't limited to oceans. New York and Ontario, well, we both have long stretches of Great Lakes shorelines. And a Rochester Institute of Technology study in 2016, you are probably familiar with this, found that 10,000 metric tons or 22 million pounds of plastic debris enter the Great Lakes every year from both the United States and Canada. Our federal government in Canada's plan for meeting the Oceans Plastics Charter commitments is outlined in the Canada-wide Action Plan for Zero Plastic Waste. The priorities of that plan include working with provinces to create a harmonized approach to EPR, banning harmful single-use and disposable products. And we did see an announcement around a federal ban just a few weeks ago. You'll be able to search for that in news clippings. national performance requirements and standards, as well as incentives for a circular economy, investments in infrastructure and innovation, and work around public procurement and green operations. So the first elements around the ban of single-use plastics and working towards a harmonized approach to EPR are phase 1 of the action plan. Now, in the action plan, it clearly identifies EPR as a necessary tool in addressing plastic pollution and creating a circular economy for this material. It identifies EPR actually as the most effective way to support the creation of a circular economy. And so I just want to spend a little bit of time looking at how Canada is doing on that score. And I'll just do a little brief snapshot of the 5 Canadian provinces with EPR for PPP at the moment. Quebec would be the additional one beyond the 4 that are supported by CSSA. So we have 10 provinces, we have 3 territories. As I said, 5 of them have packaging EPR. 4 of those 5 are shared cost programs or cost transfer programs. Producers provide a level of funding. It's different by province. I'll go through that. You see it on your slide. But the operational responsibility for delivering services remains with municipalities. And so those are Ontario, which began in 2004. Businesses pay 50% of municipal costs today. There is work underway right now to prepare to transition to an individual producer responsibility model in the next few years. I'll touch on that more in a moment. Quebec launched just after Ontario in 2005. Businesses pay 100% of municipal costs, but don't have any operational responsibility. They are in Quebec looking to move to a full producer responsibility model as well. Manitoba launched in 2010. Businesses pay 80% of municipal costs, and in Saskatchewan, businesses pay 75% of municipal costs. That program launched in 2016. In British Columbia, it is the only full producer responsibility program in Canada. I'm sure you've taken a look at that model. It's fully financed and operated by businesses. It launched in 2014, and I'll spend just a moment looking at some of the highlights and achievements of that program. Just in summary, as I get into this, I would say that it is our experience that full producer responsibility, where producers have both the financial and operational responsibility, it does provide the best performance outcomes. And we've seen that where we've got a cost transfer program, the performance of programs has stagnated. The types of materials that are being collected are fragmented from one community to another. There's no consistency, and we're just not seeing improvements in the amount of material that's being collected. Whereas in British Columbia, we see a very strong, local, robust supply chain. Most of the plastics are managed locally. I believe the number is 99% are managed in province. We have a recovery rate that surpasses the regulated requirement of 75%. There are year-over-year improvements in material-specific performance, including a 3.5% increase in plastics recovery, which is now sitting at 46% against a 2025 target of 50%, so almost at that 2025 target already. There's a province-wide common basket of materials for collection. It's supported by a province-wide communication and resident awareness campaign. It's achieved a broad level of engagement with BC residents. And we believe that BC has the most comprehensive list of acceptable materials in any jurisdiction in North America, if not globally. Residents across the province, they're provided with recycling services that includes northern and remote communities. So we offer curbside collection, multifamily collection, and depot collection. We've got a strong working relationship with many First Nations communities. And lastly, Recycle BC will be able to report the greenhouse gas impact of its recycling supply chain in 2021, providing greater transparency around the environmental impact of BC's recycling program. We know there are critics of EPR. We know there are critics of Recycled BC's model, some in Canada, some in the US. These critics often like to point out costs as a reason to avoid EPR policy. According to the Recycling Partnership's 2020 State of Curbside Recycling Report in the US, the average annual cost of PPP recycling was $54.70 US per household. That's approximately $13 US more than Recycled BC's cost, which is $55 Canadian. So it's about a third more expensive what's being reported by the Recycling Partnership in the US compared to what we're seeing in BC with a system-wide approach. And that, despite the lower cost, we've got very good performance in BC. That same study by the Recycling Partnership found a 32% recovery rate in the US compared to Recycled BC's 78.2% recovery rate. From an accessibility perspective, we understand only half of Americans enjoy access to non-subscription curbside recycling versus 98.6% of BC residents that enjoy access to recycling services through the various channels I just described. In the meantime, in Canada, a number of provinces are in the midst of transition with respect to their EPR programs. I'll just quickly go through this. In Ontario, that shared responsibility model where 50% of the costs are being paid by municipalities and 50% by businesses. Ontario is transitioning to a full producer responsibility model under a new Circular Economy Act. It's a bit different than what we see in BC. The Ontario legislation requires that producers individually must meet certain performance obligations. They can come together and procure services from a pro, but the individual business is on the hook to meet those obligations. In BC, it is the program that has responsibilities under an approved program plan, and it must meet those commitments. We do anticipate that the Ontario model will attract multiple pros competing for producer businesses. This is a much more complex model. It requires more compliance oversight. It requires coordination amongst producers and pros to ensure both a level playing field, but also that all households receive access to recycling services, that there's only one truck driving down each road, servicing each household, and so there needs to be coordination about how producers are going to share in the cost and the performance of the system, and all the while providing a common level of service to residents. At this time, we hear that other provincial regulators are watching the Ontario model as it is being consulted on. The draft regulation has been published, but at this time we're hearing that other regulators are looking more at the BC type model than looking to implement the Ontario model. Manitoba, as I said, is a cost share program as well. The province has signaled that they're looking to move to a full producer responsibility model. They are probably going to begin the consultations on that in 2021. The same can be true, is true for Saskatchewan. Similar discussions are taking place there to move to a full producer responsibility model. Again, wanting to take advantage of the performance improvements that come with full producer responsibility. Alberta has signaled an interest in moving to a producer responsibility model as well. This is driven by the economic challenges faced by municipalities, but also the province has signaled that they see this as part of an economic diversification plan for them. I don't have any timelines for when they're looking to move. And of course, in the Atlantic provinces, they're looking to go to EPR as well. And we're optimistic that they're going to move to a regional approach. I know I'm short on time. I do want to spend a couple of moments talking about some of the principles around effective EPR that we have come up with in consultation with different stakeholders. First, we believe that where producers are asked to pay for the cost of recycling systems, they must be granted the ability to make operational decisions that deliver efficiencies. Second, by providing ready access to recycling services with a common set of materials collected across the jurisdiction, whether that's a province, a state, or a country, supported by a resident education program that's common to all, we believe that will recover the greatest amount of resources. Third, we believe it's appropriate to provide support for small businesses, but we also believe that where there are obligated businesses, there needs to be a level playing field. They need to all pay their share. There needs to be strong compliance. We also believe that each material should bear its own cost in the system. There shouldn't be cross-subsidization. So plastics pay for the cost of plastics and paper would pay for the cost of paper. And finally, we believe producers are benefited from healthy competition for collection and resource recovery services within the waste management sector. We think that this competition breeds innovation and will enable the achievement of performance commitments. Adding to these principles, we believe that there's a role for provincial and state governments as well as federal governments to set policy objectives, establish targets, and ensure a level playing field. We believe municipalities are a valuable service delivery agent under full producer responsibility. We're in favor of collaboration to ensure common objectives are achieved. We recognize that municipalities have a close working relationship with residents. Lastly, producers, we believe, should be afforded responsibility to develop programs, set standards that achieve outcomes-based regulations. And so along with these principles and system roles, there are 4 components that we believe are essential to effective EPR. Harmonization across programs. For us, that means across provinces. For you, that may mean across states. Maybe at some point it's across countries. And we see that there are common requirements set on businesses, many of whom are operating internationally. I believe regulations should be based on outcomes. I mentioned that on the previous slide. Regulations should specify the what, but leave the how for producers to determine, and the how accompanies producer self-determinacy. With respect to performance and enforcement oversight, again, that's a level playing field discussion. Governments need to ensure adequate resourcing to enforce regulations and ensure all obligated producers are contributing their fair share to the system. And we also believe adequate time is necessary to implement these requirements. We often see that there is a fair bit of time spent consulting with stakeholders as regulations are built, and then regulators are looking for a very quick turnaround for the program implementation. And we believe that time is necessary to do proper procurement to get the efficiencies that are necessary for a regional approach to EPR, as well as to talk to different stakeholders about what roles are appropriate for them to play, and where, for example, municipalities wish to provide services and where they don't. And I'll just go very quickly. I've only got a couple slides left. But as you know, there are several benefits to municipalities of EPR, whether that relates to cost savings or letting go of risks of commodity markets that fluctuate, or even finding markets to move materials to. Those activities rest with producers under EPR. And just looking again at the BC experience, when the China import ban came under its various iterations and the markets were turned over, Recycle BC had very strong relationships with its end markets and was able to move materials. Yes, there was an impact to the prices that were received, but we were able to place our materials and ensure that those resources went back into circular economies. And just lastly, and there are all kinds of different slides around circular economy. This is just one of many. We saw another one earlier, and there are the ones by Ellen MacArthur Foundation and others. But EPR can stimulate circular economies by making sure that we're able to collect sufficient resources to put back into the manufacturing processes that enable producers to meet the commitments that they're making around recycled content. And as they do that, They're thinking about the design of their packaging to ensure it's recyclable so it can then be captured again and keep that loop going. And I'll just end with that. And my thanks again for being a part of this discussion today. My contact information is here. And Andrew, back over to you. Thank you.
David, thank you. Some really great information there, and obviously some best-in-class efforts happening in Canada. Certainly some models of excellence for us in the States to try to emulate and learn from. So we still have almost the full contingent of folks that started the call still with us, and I know we're at about 12:05, but I think Luann is willing to give us a few more minutes here. And the next session, I think, doesn't begin until 1:30 anyhow. So if folks are willing to hang in there for a few more minutes, it would be great. And there are some interesting questions here. There's one that's kind of like a little bit outside of the EPR arena. So I think our speakers are gonna have to put your thinking hats on a little bit. But are there any other fields, even outside of the solid waste field, where the producers are required to take some financial responsibility for their products end of life? Just something else that's maybe similar to packaging EPR that we think is a workable economic and operational approach, but something outside of, let's say, solid waste per se, like in the oil and gas industry, where they may have to pay for greenhouse gas reduction initiatives. So to any of the speakers, does anything along those lines come to mind where there's other models that maybe EPR could learn from?
I can jump in maybe. We've seen sort of litter fees assessed in a few states, I think Washington State and others, in terms of, and it's in the solid waste space, but there is, I think, some interest, and I don't want to use this as a talking point necessarily, in as simple, at least initially, for the first EPR system that's set up in the United States, simplicity early on in assessing those fees and using a fee structure that might build into eco-modulation and build into some of the aspirations, I think, of where the Canadian and some of the European systems are. But I think there are models that may have parallels in terms of some of the litter space and some of those elements that some of our folks have looked at and said that's a simpler approach to do it based upon revenue or based upon a factor that is a baseline and then modulate from there.
Andy, thanks. Anybody else?
Well, Andrew, this is Garth. Just from a kind of logistics perspective, obviously the product returns and warranty situation that most products are subject to, and sometimes legally. There's a pretty well developed and robust network for managing product returns, repairability, and so forth. So, there are clearly some examples with consumer products that exist in terms of where the manufacturers are directly involved with that, with warranty and product returns. Obviously, those tend to be more in the durable goods rather than packaging, but at least that provides an example.
Great, thanks, Garth. And maybe if we could quickly double back to this question too, about paying for subscription services or the money flow for subscription services, where let's say the municipality is not so much directly involved, but there is this system of per capita payment potentially, and but again, the municipality might not be involved with that. How does the money flow either to the resident somehow or to the hauler? David or Garth, any explanation or clarification you can provide on that subscription approach?
I'm happy to jump in. So under the EPR model, and when we look at British Columbia as the example, we don't have subscription service. So we've got a model where producers, through Recycle BC has made offers to municipalities that wish to provide services. Where the municipality does not wish to provide services, then Recycle BC is procuring those services directly and providing it. So it's not a subscription-based model. The requirement under the regulation and the approved program plans is that resident accessibility be provided and the costs of that be covered by producers and by the approved program. And so no longer, if there had been subscription services, that would no longer be required because the collection would be delivered on behalf of producers through the pro.
I will point out on that note, it's not a critique necessarily of the British Columbia system, but there were, as I understand it, some folks, and I'll let Steve speak to it, there's simplicity in having the producers run the system and do that contracting, but to your point, there's no subscription service. So there are providers that may be providing subscription services that may lose out in that system because there may just be one, if we move to a full producer responsibility system, then producers will be making that decision for folks. And that's not something that we're asking for because it's not something that the producers are experts in, particularly here in the United States.
Yeah. If I might, my video is not on, but I've been on all along. The issue of it's turned off by center command. I love this stuff. Command and control versus independent operator stuff. But anyway, it's cool. The issue of New York State has a very comprehensive law for solid waste, and it's a federated approach between the state and the counties, the planning units, some of the communities, depending on the planning unit level that they chose, and whether they chose to have whatever system they've chosen to have it's codified in their plan and they understand what's going on. So I don't see this as being necessarily a big lift. If the community wants to participate in a new program and use funds that are provided or programs that are provided for it to do things, that's great. If they want to allow the private industry to continue to provide subscription service, recycling services, they can affirm that, and then the private sector can go into the system and get the per capita or per ton or whatever the formula is. And I would think as well, I didn't say that the subscriptions hauler has to participate in the system. I said that we have to be treated equally. If the system can't exclude them to say, look, we're going to give the money over here, but there's all this other service territory, and we're going to forget about them. The idea is that if they are in the game, providing the services under the metrics of this new plan, and they're the preferred vendor in that region or area of the state, they should have access to it. This is a question of, look, the objective here is to get the recycling program improved. And, again, that's one of those sleeper issues, Andrew, that you asked. What's down the road? If you're going to take someone's business away, or if you're going to push a city out of the game, that mayor or that business owner is going to be banging the phone will be burning up. He'll be talking to his state reps, he'll be talking to his, so that's what we're talking about. This system is accretive, we believe. The current system, and again, I love all these other models, God bless everybody, all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, we're out there every day doing this job. We've built the MRFs, we've got the trucks, we understand how materials flow in the state. And if you supplant that, you displace people. Displaced people get more angry than people that we want to cooperate with you and work into your system. So, this isn't like an either or. I've got some of the questions I think are pointed like, are you not going to support the bill if we don't get what you, it doesn't work that way. At the end of the day, we're trying to communicate what's actually going on out there. And we think if you patch the current model and add some improvements to it, you're going to have a much more effective yield quicker than if you try to redesign the whole system and kick everyone else to the curb. And again, I've had this discussion, I can say it out loud because it'll bear the light of sun. I have not said this is about my companies. My companies obviously do have a financial interest, so we employ a lot of people. We're a significant stakeholder. We have a right to be here talking this way, but we're also standing up the intergovernmental model here. We're not Canada, we're not Europe. This is how we've developed recycling over the last 30 or 40 years. And to just push that system aside, look, I don't know what 20, 30, 40 years down the road is going to look like, but I know what today looks like. And we can make some real significant gains if we integrate this kind of funding into a new program to help move the needle. So that's my view. And again, you can say, well, he's just in it to protect his companies. I don't think that's fair. There's an intergovernmental model here that's been vetted, it's been passed by the legislature, been implemented, plans approved, every step along the way we've gotten here. And I'm not saying that it can't be improved. We all know it can be improved. But, you know, working within that model, we believe, is a far better effort than trying to recreate the whole system. My 2 cents.
I think I should just jump in quickly and recognize that the concerns that we often hear and are hearing about now are shared. Those are concerns that we hear from stakeholders in Canada as well. The experience that we have seen as Recycle BC has launched a program and moved to producer responsibility is that, you know, a competitive tendering process has enabled many service providers, collectors and processors and transfer stations and depot operators to not only remain as participants in the system, but some are telling us they wouldn't exist today based on the challenges of the commodity markets if it weren't for the stability that's being provided through a centralized program. And so Recycle BC does not insource and does not deliver directly the waste management or recycling services. Those are all outsourced. And municipalities are given a choice. There's a first right of refusal that says, municipality, would you like to participate? Would you like to keep things going and be that delivery agent on our behalf? And if the municipality says yes, they sign the contract, they meet performance obligations that are set out and are common to all communities, but they're paid for it. If they choose not to, if they say, you know, I just don't want to be in this any longer, it's only then that Recycle BC has even the ability to go out there and competitively procure another service provider to provide collection services. And I'll tell you, City of Vancouver, one of the largest municipalities in the country, they started as a service provider to Recycle BC. And they decided after a while, they were watching what was happening through the rest of the province. And they decided, we're going to actually get out of this business of recycling altogether. We're going to hand it over to Recycle BC. And that was a big step for them, but one that they are quite pleased with.
Thanks, David. Risa has asked a great question that I think we can conclude with and have, you know, any of the and all of the presenters speak to if they want. But before we get to that, I got one other question for David, and perhaps a clarification. One of the other participants asked about is what happened in BC in the wake of National Sword. You know, how was BC able to move its materials, and did they change any of its regulations after National Sword? And then we'll get back to this last question, folks. But David, if you could address that, please.
Thank you. Yeah, no regulatory changes as a result. Because of the systemic approach, we've been able to manage down the levels of contamination that are coming into the system. That meant that as it's being sorted, we're able to create a very good quality output. And we had entered into you know, arrangements that provided us with good access to our end markets. Some of those, like I said, we had developed relationships locally within the province to make sure we could move materials. And the amount of material that we were moving and the strength of the relationship that had been built meant that we were able to meet those requirements. So I think that was a real big positive, and we were able to achieve things in British Columbia that I know from the other programs that we're supporting, the municipalities that we're paying money to, they couldn't get access to markets the way that Recycle BC as a program could. Even large programs couldn't secure that. So it was really about scale. It was about years of working with the resident to make sure that we're getting the right stuff. It was about the investment in sorting facilities to make sure that, you know, as we've got this scale of material coming through the system, the investments were put in the right place in order to get a clean output in a much more cost-effective way than if those investments needed to be made at the municipal level. If we needed to put the kind of technology that we have in our centralized facilities into local MRFs, the cost to producers would have been extraordinary. But the way it's been designed, funneling material to larger facilities and then installing technology gives us the ability to be nimble as packaging changes come, but deliver really great output.
I think in some ways that speaks to this last question that Risa poses, that I think is a good end cap to the discussion today. And she asks, assuming the objective is ultimately to improve recycling performance, how do these models move toward that? How do we make sure that we're not just shifting financial responsibility, but actually getting better performance? Anybody?
You know, I'll jump in, Andrew. The whole concept of the stewardship responsible organization is the new model, because, you know, the tax base is there from the localities and the planning units and the current systems we have. And if the manufacturers can be brought into the loop through a new funding mechanism, that a stewardship responsible organization, it will be able to address the all of the system approach, because they'll be able to apply resources to education and generator behaviors. They'll be able to identify shortcomings in the marketplace with facilities for processing. So they'll be able to provide a lot of those kinds of things that we're not able to do right now. I mean, right now, I love it. The municipalities, and again, we get paid for it as industry, so, you know, that's a known fact. Someone has to pay. We lost our markets. For many years, we got a really good deal because the commodity values were so strong. We've lost access to that. We've gone into a new era of trying to get, look, those trucks and those men and women that collect the material and process it at the kinds of sites behind me have to get paid, just like the DPWs and the people working in the county MRFs. So you have to have revenues to do that. What has been missing in the equation is revenues from the consumer product companies. And if you create this new stewardship responsible organization, they will be able to try to address some of those shortcomings. And look, what is the goal, I think, of the recycling partnership or the closed loop? They want to connect people. Wouldn't that be one of the ideal functions of what a stewardship responsible organization would do? They would be looking to identify markets and do it. You know, and by the way, I work with a lot of companies. We move material too in the market. We made the I mean, it's ironic because, you know, a ton from this program, a ton from that program. We hit the mark. My private guys, the guys and the county MRFs, we are able to move material. We have markets. The general issue is the whole thing shifted when China went. That was a seismic event. So, you know, we adjusted, we adapted, and, you know, we've gotten the system going forward. So that's my 2 cents. I think that, you know, we can get this job done, and the stewardship responsible organization can provide a lot of resources and focus on areas of the system that are traditional shortcomings. And that could yield that 10 or 15% growth or 20% growth based on what we currently have, as opposed to putting it to the side and starting all over again.
Thanks, Steve. Anybody else? Final thoughts before we turn it back to Rich? Anybody?
Sure, I can weigh in on that. I think it's a really good question that Risa poses. And I think, you know, certainly the policymakers really need to decide on what are those overall outcomes that the program's intending to achieve. I mean, that's really fundamental. And then once those are determined, that the specific incentives or disincentives are reflected within the eco fee or fee structure that are the fees that are paid by the producers to the producer responsibility organization. And then next is that the specific performance requirements that are embedded within the contracts between the PRO and either municipalities or service providers. So I think, but it really kind of starts at that kind of what are the set of objectives that the policy is intended to achieve. And so all of you obviously are going to have the opportunity to help shape that discussion in New York. And so that'd be really important, I think, for the rest of the country.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Garth. With that, Rich, we'll turn it back to you. I just want to thank the speakers, Garth, David, Steve, Dawn, and Andrew. Thanks all for some really great information. Rich, I think we delivered on the super hot speaker thing. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. I'm not even sure what I think now. There's been enough interesting perspectives here that have got me completely rethinking everything about EPR. So it was great. It was excellent. And it was an excellent job by you as well, Andrew. Thanks to all the speakers. Thanks to the moderator. And I know we had a number of excellent questions as well. So if everybody's all right, I think I'd like to wrap this up so we can go get lunch. We've got to be back by 1:30 for the power generation this afternoon, the last section of this conference. So thanks again to everybody, and we'll see you this afternoon.